Hi everyone! In this video I want to compare the qualities and performance of traditional oil paints and water-mixable oils. Water-mixable oils sound like a dream come true. They promise the same qualities as traditional oil paints, but without having to use any toxic solvents in the process. I started out painting with water-mixable oils, and then I graduated to traditional oil paints, and now I use both interchangeably in my art process. So I wanted to share my experience and hopefully help you decide which one works for you. Like all paints, oil paint consists of two parts, a pigment and a binder, usually linseed oil or safflower oil. And let's get this out of the way. Water-mixable oils are oil paints. They contain the same parts, a pigment and an oil-based binder. In this case, it's usually modified linseed or safflower oil, which allows them to be diluted with water and acts as an emulsifier. They can be used with the same techniques as traditional oil paints because they have a lot of the same qualities in consistency, pigmentation, and slow drying time. And water-mixable oils can even be mixed with traditional oil paints, but you would be kind of defeating the purpose because they would no longer be dilutable with water. With traditional oil paints, the opportunities are endless because there's a lot of different brands, some of which have been around for centuries. Quite literally, like Old Holland here was founded in 1664 and still produces some of the best quality paints out there. So here's some brands that I have tried and can recommend, and that includes Old Holland, Gambling, Michael Harding, Rembrandt, and Sennelier. A lot of the brands also offer student-grade lines, which are usually cheaper, but they contain a lot less pigment, so you would have to use a lot more of that paint to achieve the same results as with studio-quality paints. So I'd recommend going for quality from the start. When it comes to water-mixable oils, there's a lot less choice out there, and they might be harder to come by if you don't have a big art supply store in the vicinity. So far, I've tried two brands, and they are Winsor & Newton Artisan Series and Royal Talent's Cobra. Out of these two, I would say that Winsor & Newton is closer to student-grade quality paints, because they can have very chunky and even grainy consistency and are a little harder to work with. Meanwhile, Cobra is a lot closer to high-quality traditional oil paints, and it has a very nice buttery consistency to it. Keep in mind that they also have student-grade line, but I would recommend sticking with artist-quality paints. For water-mixable oils, we're probably not going to get any of the crazy colors anytime soon. I'm talking about the stuff that Vasari makes, their chromatic grays such as Shiprock or Silver Point and so on. However, Cobra offers 70 colors in their water-mixable oil paint range, and I think they're more than enough to satisfy the needs of any artist out there who has got their mixing basics down. Personally, I prefer to use water-mixable oils when I'm painting inside because I get headaches from using traditional oils when I'm painting inside my small apartment. It's gotten a little better since I started wearing a mask whenever I can and cleaning everything right after I'm done, taking the canvas outside to dry and airing out my apartment as much as I can. Still, traditional oils have this very distinct smell to them, and it applies to all of the mediums that you're going to use with them. The mediums is where the main difference in the toxicity of traditional oils and water-mixable oils lies. Traditionally, you would use something like turpentine to dilute your paint, and there's still artists that use it today. And trust me, turpentine is bad news for your health because it is extremely toxic and it evaporates very quickly. That's why I use something like Sennelier's non-toxic thinner and their brush cleaner from the same line. And there's also stuff like balsam resin medium, which makes your paint film glossy and pretty, but also happens to be another dangerous substance with extremely toxic fumes. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that both turpentine and linseed oil are highly flammable, and linseed oil is also known to randomly combust if you don't store it properly. So the bottom line is that old masters had a whole array of tools that are not safe to handle if you don't know what you're doing. However, there's still artists that try to follow the same routine today because it has been tested by time. With water-mixable oils, you have to trust the new technology from the get-go because they themselves are a new painting medium. They are made to be environmentally friendly, which again mostly comes from their ability to be diluted with not something like turpentine, but with water instead, which I'll talk more about later. The paints themselves are almost completely odorless, and the same can be said about the mediums engineered specifically for water-mixable oil painting. However, it doesn't mean that the paints are completely non-toxic, because we're still using the same pigments as we would in traditional oil painting. So you have to be careful with pigments like Naples yellow, cadmium red, cadmium yellow, cobalt blue, and so on. For any oil paints, you're going to want to have at least two mediums, a thinner and an oil medium. While many artists still stick to turpentine, there's a lot of less toxic options in the market these days, such as Gamsol, which has been gaining popularity. It's an odorless mineral spirit, and unfortunately I don't have access to it here, so I use Green for Oil by Sennelier, which has been working fine for me so far. As for oil mediums, I use Schmincke's refined oil medium. And you can use something like safflower oil or walnut oil instead. I think it comes down to personal preference. This is the bare minimum, and it doesn't cover all of the mediums out there, like the ones that affect the drying time or improve the glossiness of your paint. Trust me, there's a lot of them. Now let's get the big question out of the way. As the name suggests, water-mixable oils can be diluted with water and it can be used as a thinner. However, I prefer to use something like this specialized thinner by Artisan, which is almost completely odorless and non-toxic. This is because if you are using water as your thinner, you speed up the drying time and you also run the risk of breaking down the paint structure. If you use too much water, you will separate the pigment from the binder, and this will lead to the paint film cracking later and being more unstable in general. However, you shouldn't worry about using a little bit of water with your water-mixable oils, so long as they are not runny. To improve the flow of water-mixable oils, I use this painting medium by Cobra. And I heard that they released a linseed oil, a modified linseed oil, but I haven't gotten my hands on it yet. And this painting medium does its job, but I wouldn't recommend it for oiling out if you are working multiple layers. There's one issue that you need to keep in mind with water-mixable oil painting mediums, and that's that some of them will not work with paints from another brand. For example, my Artisan thinner doesn't work with some of my Cobra paints, creating a grainy mess instead of an evenly thinned out paint. So my advice would be to stick to the same brand with both the paints and the mediums when you are painting with water-mixable oils. Water-mixable oils dry the same way traditional oil paints do, through a process called oxidation. And once they are dry, they are just like any other oil painting and should be treated as such when it comes to varnishing and so on. I've heard a lot of people talk about water-mixable oils drying faster, but honestly that hasn't been my experience, and my Cobra Titanium White takes forever to dry. It usually takes about a week for the painting to become dry to the touch, and that's about the same as with traditional oil paints. With both of these paints, you are good to keep painting the next day, wet into wet, if you paint alla prima and you didn't finish your painting in one session. If you would like to speed up the drying time though, there's different mediums for both traditional oil paints and water-mixable oil paints. There's alkyds, liquids, etc. And I like to add some alkyd and chalk into my titanium white to bulk it up and speed up the drying time. This is where a lot of arguments start about whether water-mixable oils are worth using in the first place. Traditional oil paints have been around for centuries and they have, so to say, passed the test of time. Water-mixable oils do promise the same durability and the same archival qualities as traditional oils, but they were first manufactured in the 1980s, and there's hardly a painting out there that has been around for more than a couple of decades that's been made with them. That's why it raises concerns with manufacturers and art purists, and that's why there's not a lot of brands out there that produce these paints. For example, I heard that Robert Gambling says that he doesn't trust the science behind the manufacturing process of these new paints, and he focuses solely on producing very high quality traditional oil paints. At the same time, there's no real proof that the paintings done with water-mixable oils are any less archival than the ones produced with traditional oil paints. And the manufacturers and proponents of water-mixable oils swear by their archival qualities and light fastness. And I suppose only time will show, but for now I don't have any reason to believe that you compromise on the durability of your work by choosing water-mixable oils over traditional oil paints. If anything, there's a lot of ways to compromise the durability of your paintings, even when you're using traditional oil paints, especially when you're painting in layers. Here comes another big advantage of water-mixable oils. They're super easy to clean, and you can usually get away with using some soap and water, but I also use this Master's brush cleaner and preserver to make sure that there's no residue left, but the process is very quick and painless, which can't be said about traditional oil paints. To clean my brushes after using traditional oils, I usually go through the following process. I wipe off the excess paint from my brushes, and then I soak them in the brush cleaner and wipe it off as well, trying to get as much paint out as possible. And then I wash them using Master's brush cleaner and preserver, which usually takes about a couple of rounds. The bottom line is that it's not as easy and straightforward as with water-mixable oils, and some artists actually try to avoid cleaning their brushes altogether by soaking them in oil, but I don't like the idea of having linseed oil out in the open in my apartment for the reasons I mentioned before, and I don't have my own art studio yet. Now I'd like to show you both of these paints in action as I'm painting a still life with some pumpkins, because the spooky season is around the corner. I'll be using the same subject and pretty much the same pigments across both paintings to make sure it's a fair comparison. I started out with water-mixable oils, and as you will see, I followed the same process for both paintings. I started out by toning my canvas and establishing the big shapes with some thinned out paint. Then I quickly covered the canvas and spent some time working on the details to finalize the paintings. As you can see, I use water to clean my brushes mid-painting, and they are pretty much clean from that alone, which isn't something you can do with traditional oil paints. Difference I noticed is that with water-mixable oils, the paint has more drag to it and doesn't spread as easily, while with traditional oils, a little goes a long way. So I think I ended up using more paint with water-mixable oils than with traditional oils, especially for the background. And here's the final result. I quite like it. Now let's look at how the traditional oils perform. I'm going to use paint thinner, brush cleaner and linseed oil. I'll also use a palette of oil paints by Gamblin, Michael Harding, Old Holland and Sennelier, trying to match the pigments I used in the first painting. One difference is that I only have cadmium red deep, which is why the orange of the pumpkin ended up looking a little dull. I think that the outlining worked better with traditional oils because the artisan paint thinner doesn't work well with my Cobra paints. Other than that, like I said, the flow and the way the paint spreads on the canvas was a little better with these paints. It might also be a little easier to build up texture with them, but it's not something you can't achieve with water-mixable oils. And it's all done. I think that it's worth to give both a try, and if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. Also, if you would like me to cover another topic, let me know. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to this channel and give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!